Hello everyone, welcome back to Planet Zoo. We're back in Northlands National Park and you're going to notice some changes immediately. We moved the first building and we also hid the entrance. You can see at the back here though, the thing that annoys me most is this vast open space and then the guest spawners just appearing from nowhere. But what I did was I covered that main entrance just down there with a massive trees just so that we can't see it and it looks like the guests are actually arriving out of this forested area. It's just a shame that behind it is this huge empty green field where there's nothing. It would be nice to have like a big rock or something and they just come out of this tunnel as if they've come through this mountain pass or something. But anyway, back to our episode. We moved our first building, we put it on some stilts. I wanted it to kind of eat into the landscape there and I think it looks really cool, and we are going to pad this out a little bit more, and in that empty field we're going to put our first habitat. So I'm going to start by building some nice foundations for this new location. We've also put in a water purifier and a generator because I don't actually have the use of the entrance generators anymore, where you get like a little bit of power in that small area of effect. So we've had to put that in place, but that's okay. We've kept it in with that staff building. It's just extended things a little bit more. Now over here, we're going to have our reindeer habitat. That's correct. Our first proper habitat is going to be reindeers. I'm hoping there's enough clearance there because what I want to do is I want to make like a little barn underneath so that they've got an area to go and hide, and we're going to try and make some nice staff staircases at the back of the building that we've got up there just to make sure that everything kind of is hidden and staff still have access to the habitat. Anyway, we're beginning with our foundations, and what I want is to build a nice foundation around here and have a water feature that goes down this one side of it. I had thought about using the water wheels and things from the Asia pack, but after playing around with them for a little bit, it didn't seem to work for me. We're just speeding up the simulation as well because my funds are pretty low, so I do have it running at various points throughout this episode so that guests can come in and donate money and things like that. So we're going to have a stepping down waterfall system. So we're bringing in these wonderful temple block foundation pieces, and we're going to use these as a wall to stick on some rocks and stuff and build a nice little bit of rock work all the way around just to make it look like nice and natural, and everything should be fitting in as it is. Had a little bit of difficulty editing things because of the fact that I'd already built the top of this building and had to do a little bit of an adjustment just to get everything in place properly, and my first and main task was to actually just wall it all off. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to cut and destroy the bits that I don't need when I'm building the animals' shelter. And it's just going to give me a nice little barometer of what I'm working with. Because I'm building from top to bottom, it's making things a little bit difficult for me. So we had a little bit of things to think about and sort out as we were doing that. Like here, where I'm putting in this temple floor just to give a little bit of a foundation for that next level, and then here where we have that little bit of a step up so that I can make sure that I'm not putting things where they shouldn't be and having the upper level interfering with the lower level. I don't want to eat too much into the space here, so I do check every now and then to make sure that nothing's poking through, especially later on when we start putting in our log walls and things like that. And I wanted to make sure that there was still enough clearance for the reindeer to actually gain access to this. So next part is to work on our water feature. This one took a little bit of time to actually get right. Like I said, I did play around with the water wheels because I think they would have looked perfect here, but I didn't get the desired effect that I was looking for, and I eventually gave up on the idea and just stuck with some waterfalls. Now, you may get a little bit wet walking up here because there's a nice bit where the water almost juts out onto the path, and I imagine any guests that are walking down will get a nice cold shock if they happen to get splashed by anything that's coming off. It doesn't look like it's actually merging with the path itself, so we might get away with it. And the idea is that the last tier of this waterfall drops down underneath the path and comes out to make the waterway going into the pond right here that we're putting in now, that the reindeer are going to be able to drink out of and do a little bit of swimming in. I don't think they do much swimming, but it's also going to give me an opportunity to use the rocks and stuff that I've already implemented in the Saltwell Safari Park Zoo and actually put in the nice features that I couldn't put in with some of the animals that have certain swimming requirements and stuff, like the pygmy hippo, where I spent a lot of time doing that and had to undo all of that hard work. So yeah, it's been a really fun build. I've actually really enjoyed doing this, put a lot of effort into it and a lot of time. There were a lot of adjustments made, and I'm just very happy with the overall outcome, and I hope you guys are too, because it has been a lot of fun. Did have to play around a little bit with this little area here, because it got a little bit difficult just to work it all out, and there were a lot of testing phases and adjustments made, but we got there in the end, and the end result actually is probably one of the better water features I've done. I don't play around a lot with the water features anyway, let's be honest. But it was nice to branch out and do something a little bit different to what I'm normally used to doing. We brought these barriers down, and obviously we've still got the glass sticking out a little bit, but we are going to cover those up, especially on the sides. We're going to put in some nice little fences on the guest facing sides, and obviously the rocks that we're going to be putting in place will cover, hopefully, the rest of the barrier there. Lots of adjustments to be made though, and we do have a great big deal of rock work to do on this side, especially on the side that faces the hill itself, because I want to make sure that everything naturally forms and fits in with the rest of the environment. The whole reason I was wanting to build this park is to make something that looks really nothing's being just plonked down for the sake of it, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting everything right first time so that I don't have to go back and make adjustments. Obviously with Saltwell Safari Park it was a very let's just throw something at the wall and see what sticks kind of method, and this probably is the one where I've done a lot more planning and a lot more playing around with things before finalising anything, and that is another reason why I don't want to have to come back and make any little adjustments in a separate episode. So everything you're going to see today is probably going to be the finished article, completed, and we won't be going back to make any edits or adjustments. The one thing I've really enjoyed about doing this is getting to play with the actual water features and things, because it's given me a lot more experience with working with rocks and the water itself. It's allowed me to grow a little bit as a builder in doing those things and work out which rocks are which. I now have a little bit more of a sense of which number rock corresponds to the amount of space it's going to take up, rather than just hoping for the best. But it did take a lot of playing around with, and the thing that I've really enjoyed about doing these videos is every time I do a video I'll play with something a little bit different and learn something new, and that's been really exciting for me. There is one thing that I would like to add in post on this, and that's putting a few plants and stuff in the actual water itself. At the moment we've got this nice rock face, and obviously the rocks here are forming the kind of riverbed type thing, as if this is as deep as it goes, and this is us playing with a water wheel, because I thought it would look really cool there and really cool there, but if we had it really far down it would not make mechanical sense, and then having it all the way up there, that was going to interfere far too much with the staff buildings. But it is something that I may play around with in a later episode. I did have an idea to do a beaver habitat. Now I think the beavers are more of a temperate climate, but I would have liked to do a converted sawmill or something, because obviously you've got the beavers and things, they do a lot of stuff with wood and build their own dams and stuff, and a converted sawmill that becomes this beaver habitat I think would be a really cool idea. And obviously we could do it the Skyrim sawmill from River Run, I think it is one of the first towns you come to anyway. It has that water wheel, I think, if I'm remembering my Skyrim rightly. I've not played it for a while. Happy 10th anniversary of Skyrim, by the way. Anyway, totally different game, and we're not even talking about habitat that we're building today. So here we are putting in our water effects and things. Obviously you can see there's some stuff splashing out because the area of this water feature is only 4 meters across, and the smallest part of the water features that we can actually have are 4 or 5 meters, especially for the larger pieces. Obviously the little splashes we can put in, and we've put some rocks as if the water's buffering up against those rocks and creating those little splashes and stuff, which I think is a really cool effect. But we've had to move the water feature pieces over to the left there, if you're looking at the screen right now, because we can cover up those splashes a lot easier than we can if we were to have them on the other side, because the other side's just going to be plants and stuff, and that wouldn't look good if we have the splashes and stuff just looping over to that side. whereas on the side that we've currently got the splashers on would be easy to cover things up with rocks and stuff, which is what we're going to have predominantly on that other side. We're still going to put some planters and stuff in because I think that's going to really finish it off, and we need to make sure that we stick with the theme. So you may see a lot of trees and things that we've already got in place just being repeated, but I think that's important just because we want to make sure that we've got that theme and we're sticking with it. So obviously a lot of the greenery and things you're going to see are going to be quite similar, but I don't think that's a problem because we want to try and keep this as natural and thematic as possible and make sure that most of the plants and trees and stuff we've got in here would be naturally occurring in this environment. Saltwell Safari Park was a little bit different. We could put all of those tropical plants and stuff in because it was just a case of it's a zoo for everything and everyone and multiple biomes and things like that. Here we want to be a little bit more true to our source material, shall we say. So while that's been going on, while I've been chatting away here, we have put in our new water features and stuff. There was a lot of playing around to get the angles correct because I didn't want any water splashing out onto the path. Obviously, thinking about it and looking at it, that would definitely happen. People would be getting a nice little misty spray as they walk past there. But we want to make sure they're awake, get them nice and cold so that they run in and seek shelter and buy a lot of food and stuff. So they don't mind getting a little bit cold and wet. It'll be fine. Next, we are doing our rock work, and that is going to be like a huge chunk of this episode because I did a lot of moving around. And obviously I wanted to replicate this over on the other side. I'm not showing you me doing both sides. Once you've seen this one, you can pretty much guess that the other one's going to be vaguely similar with a few adjustments. I'm not doing a waterfall on the other side. I'm just going to extend the planters and things that I've got because I don't want things to be too symmetrical in this build. I'd like to make a few unique things. I had thought about doing like a little outpost or like a watchtower type structure on there, but I thought that might be a little bit overkill and I wanted to try and keep things a little bit simple. So we've put our main bulk of rock in, that gives us our foundation, and the rest is just about playing with what we can fit in. So I wanted to make a level, that would be our top level, and that's going to be using these cladding pieces, and then we can build the rest of those foundations further up. And as we go up, because we don't want a sheer cliff face jumping off the side here, otherwise we might as well just stick with the brickwork. So we're just going to build up our foundation right the way up to the top. I'm putting mulch in now because that gives us that top plate, and I can then adjust all of the rocks, pull them out a little bit, which again means I need to use less pieces to fill it in because underneath that mulch now is just this open void, and it also makes our piece count drop down, which will help us with making sure that we don't run too heavy on the processor and stuff, and it makes it easier just to have that void in there because nobody's going to see anything, so we don't really need anything to be in there. We can just close it off, leave that void in the middle, and concentrate on our pieces just behind it to finish off the foundations. Now here I wanted to put some nice like big planters in, so we put some mulch down and then started building up a wall. We then took that out and pulled the mulch down. We'll put in some glass there, and then I'm going to have some trees in here, and they're going to be pretty tall trees, so they'll see the base when they go through, looking through that glass, and we'll maybe put in a few smaller plants and things around that area, and then the top of the tree will come out of that open structure, and we'll maybe put some lights or something. I thought about using the Christmas spruce trees because they've already got lights on them, and we can put in a few presents or whatever and just make it look nice and Christmassy all year round or something. I don't know. Anyway, we're bringing back our lovely big thick logs just to make sure that we stick with the theme and things like that. I thought about, and I think I may do this, capping these. So we put like a steel rounded cap or something on the top of them all, maybe some lights on certain bits, but it's not something I'm thinking about massively right now because I quite like that rustic. We've got these huge logs that are just supporting blocks and we don't really need to do anything with them. I just think it might look nice and make some pieces look a little bit more unique than the other ones, because I had noticed it was starting to look a little bit flat, samey and boring, so we may need to come back and make a few adjustments to bits and pieces. But it, like I said, most of it is finished and it's in a stage where I'm happy with it, and I feel like any further adjustments may be a little bit overkill. So here I wanted to just cap off that awkward bit of water by covering it with some rocks, and it also means that we frame those staircases really nicely on the way up, and it gives me a little bit more of a foundation to work with for when I finally get this water feature coming down into the pond itself. And this one was a tough one. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. I know we're still doing the rock work right now, but I thought it might be a good idea to talk about the habitat itself, seeing as we're about 15 minutes into the episode and I've not actually told you what I'm going to do. So the idea is that the reindeer have this barn that's underneath the main information building and plaza that we've got up the top. The staff will have an access from the rear of that building, and it'll be a staircase that goes down into like a basement area, and that'll come into the back of the barn itself. That'll allow the guests access to the animals to feed and water and all of that sort of stuff, go back in and check the habitats, and it also means there's a very minimal staff footprint on the rest of the guests. The problem is, when I finally did get around to fitting it in, the side where I wanted it to be on, I couldn't really do anything with. So I had to have the staff area and the staff entrance next to the exhibits, and it kind of goes in between the food area and the information building and those exhibits. But it looks pretty good, and it looks like it would be somewhere really where a staff entrance is, so I was pretty happy with the outcome. We did try just flat out duplicating the rocks and moving them across to save ourselves some time, but it didn't really work. So we're jumping ahead now. We're going to work on our barn. Now here you can see some logs and stuff coming down, and I just duplicated them just to make sure that we'd finished off those foundation building pieces. And then we started working on framing an area where we'd have our barn. As you can see, we've got rocks and stuff from the waterfall, so we want to make sure that they're closed off. And it was just a case of putting in the bits that we needed, because we've got our doorway right there, and making sure that everything was lined up nice and neat, so that we could build in enough space for our reindeers and any offspring that we have in the future to be able to live and relax and have plenty of movement. Because the thing is, the reindeer are pretty chunky, and a lot of my builds end up being a little bit smaller, especially in the living quarters. So we did need to make sure that we'd put in adequate space for them to move around in. One of the problems that I did have, that I'm going to admit to, is when I actually finished off this doorway here, I blocked it off with two of those thick logs, and the reindeer were entered into their habitat but couldn't actually get out into the bit where all of the guests can see them, so that was a little bit awkward. You can see us playing around and struggling to fit pieces in because we're working underground, and we have to keep checking to make sure nothing's poking through and interfering with our guest access. So this was difficult, and I wish, one of the main things that I do wish is that I'd made this decision earlier on, before I'd actually started building the information area in the first place. But sometimes I do feel like you need to create a building first before you move it into place, and then realise, oh, this could work like this. I'd quite like to try that, and I'm really pleased with it. So it has been worth the little bit of awkwardness and the tricky camera angles and the constant spinning around and trying to work out where you're going. And I think that is part and parcel of Planet Zoo. It's part of the frustration, but it's also part of the charm, that when something actually does work, it really works. Like here, we're putting in a roof, and we know that we have this void in between, which means actually I've got a lot of freedom to play around with what I put in this basement now, because we have that nice open space in the roof where we can actually sink pieces in, because we know they're not going to interfere with what's going on upstairs. Now, in here, we just made it really simple. The barn isn't something that many people are going to see. It's pretty much for staff and animals to go and sleep in. I haven't thought about doing webcams, but because of the marketing boost that they give you, especially playing on hard mode, I think it might be worth putting in a few webcams in various different places. So I do eventually do that, because I think that's pretty important. It is a very tiny boost to marketing, but it all stacks and it all adds up. So maybe every animal will get one. I may even see if I can put webcams in the exhibits. I don't see why not. But that might be a fun little thing to do. Stick a webcam in an exhibit so that it's like right up and close with the scorpions or whatever. I think that would be good to try anyway. Obviously here we start having our first issues where we have posts sticking up into the roof, and they are interfering with parts of the actual structure of the building, which isn't great, but we do work it out. And another few things that changed was I had all of these in as like separate beds, as if it was like a proper barn, very much like I did with the Wild Africa habitat. and then we started building a roof. I wanted to make this a nice log roof because I thought there was far too much stonework in here. So we used the stonework as a base and just attached the logs onto it, and then started duplicating them all across to make a nice flat roof structure, which I think looked really nice when it was finished, and it broke up the repetitiveness of those temple bricks that we had in place. I may also put some lighting features and stuff in here, or we could do a few like plants and stuff or some mosses on the walls, but it all has to make sure that it fits in with the reindeer's requirements, because this is actually in their habitats now. But I would like to put in some of the like caribou moss or something just to really finish this off and make it look a little bit less plain. Now obviously the logs we didn't have down there because there is a little, like, it's like a tiny like half-meter step down to that area where they exit, but that wasn't really an issue. I quite like that little bit of contrast that it gives when you go from the log roof to the stonework ceiling, so it looks pretty nice. Then again, a little bit more rock work just to finish this all off and make sure that everything's nice and uniform. And I really like the way that it looks like we've used these temple bricks and stuff and those wood logs to create supports that have probably been drilled into that rock and then hammered down, and it just looks like it really gives itself a nice little bit of support from like nature and our man-made structure. Then we started working on our fence, and again I used my custom fences. I made some nice log posts, and this was just very simple really. I wanted to use these fences because I think they fit in with my theme. They are the basic Planet Zoo fences, I believe. I don't think they're New World fences or anything, but I am anticipating using a lot of the New World architecture and probably some of the Arctic textures and stuff as well. As you can see, we did start running into some issues where we had height differentials, and I'd thought about different ways to work this out. Obviously I can't use any different fence pieces, and I played around with some different pieces, but it would have meant I would have to replace everything. What I actually did in the end was flip around the entire fence and line it back up, and that gave us this nice continuation of the mesh and the wood posts, and I just thought it looked pretty cool. And it was a simple solution to a problem that was starting to occur, but actually it didn't end up needing to be repeated too much, and we just carried this on all the way around, moving it step by step, angling it as we go around the path, and eventually come out with something that's really nice. It's also the habitat sort of limit for height, so the reindeers aren't going to escape or try and jump out of here, unless they develop red noses and start flying off at around Christmas time. I mean, we are not too far away from December 25th. It's, in fact, by the time this episode airs, I think it'll only be a month to Christmas Eve, so you never know. Someone might come a-calling, and I hope I don't end up with 12 reindeer in here by the end, because they may all get recruited to a big Christmas drive. Anyway, this was a pretty easy thing to do. We just carried it on all the way around, and it actually fits in really nicely, and I'm quite happy with it. I do also put a few lights and stuff in. I used the Planet Zoo, no, they're New World, I believe. New World cylindrical lights that are actually pretty fluorescent, but we made the light itself grey rather than white, and actually rather than it being a grey light, it just tones down the super saturated brightness of the light itself. And then we sunk them in to the log beams to create almost identical to those New World path lights that we've got. I just wanted to create that, but with a more wooden and rustic texture. Coming back around, we've put in a new pond here and made a nice waterfall coming into the main area. That's kind of like the watering hole for the reindeer, and I just thought that really finished it off quite nicely, because I didn't really like that pond area that I had in place in there, and I was struggling to work out what to do with it. But once we'd made it like this, I was really quite happy with it, and it looks really cool. Obviously there's a bit of work to do in the actual pond itself. I may put a few plants and stuff in, and again bring some of that caribou moss into the walls just to make it look like stuff's creeping up there. Carrying on, we put a nice big rock in the middle. Our reindeer are in place and they are wandering around. You've just seen one walk past us. But I do think this looks really nice. As a build, this took about 5.5 hours in total. So you're seeing a hyper sped up version of it, but there were many like iterations and differences in the build itself where I went through plenty of changes and thought, I don't like that, we're going to take that out and start again. But overall, really over the moon with this, and it's looking great. We then put some bedding in, going back into this barn, putting down some nice enrichment items and some scratching posts and feeders, so that the reindeer have plenty to do and plenty of places to go in the habitat where there's plenty of things to do for them. It's also going to give us a nice opportunity to draw the crowds to various parts of the habitat, because I'm hoping anyway that they're not going to get stacked up in one place. The worst place for them to get stacked up would be on that staircase. One, they're going to get soaking wet, and two, it's just going to cause a huge people pile up. So I may actually make our next habitat to the right of our screen right now, just to make sure that we're driving traffic around another part of the zoo, because I don't want things to get stacked up and for it to get too crowded too quickly. Like I say, at the moment we're in the high 200s for guest numbers and stuff here, and I don't really want to have them getting bunched up and causing overcrowding issues, so we may need to drive them to another part of the zoo. The next step is just to put a little bit of foliage in. We're decorating around the bases of our trees just to make it look nice and covered, and putting some sticking out of the rocks so they don't look all too boring and samey. Just having to duck down under where that water is, and then put in a few pops of colour with some nice flowering plants. So the reindeer themselves don't actually have a great deal of requirements for coverage, and they're one of the few animals that don't get annoyed if you have a lot of greenery in a habitat, which makes them ideal for the kind of decorating that I like to do. Like some of the other animals that I've worked with in the past, they've been a little bit fussy on what they have and the amount of space that certain plants take up in things, which isn't great. I did realise while I was doing this rock work here that I was blocking off access to that scratching post, so we do actually move that to a different area, putting in a few more nice big trees just to pop this place out a little bit more. Another thing that I really like about the reindeer is they don't need a lot of space. I mean, at the moment they don't need a lot of space, but as the population in here grows, it will start eating into the amount of space that they've got. But I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. We're just switching to nighttime now, and I'm just going to show you a few of the things that I've done. You can see the light posts that I was talking about that were themed off those New World path lights, where I've just integrated one of the New World beams into the wood posts themselves, just going by here, and we just made them a little bit of a darker shade of white, more of a grey. And then over here we've put in those little orbs that I really like, and I think they just look like little, perfectly spherical, might I add, rocks, but they have a nice glow to it. We then ran some festive fairy lights all the way along here just to add a little bit of colour and light to the pond. And then we did some steel bars and brickwork in these animal habitats rather than actually just leaving them as wood. I just thought it made it look a little bit better. Up here we've got some lighting work to do on that next part, and that's going to form up the next part of the build itself. Through in the underground area again, we go through here, and I developed this staff area. This was an absolute pain to build, so I haven't shown it in the video because you would probably have some difficulty following it all, but we mapped it out with some support beams, put in some nice stone stairwells, and made like a little storage area for various bits and pieces, threw down some fabric on the walls just to finish it off. I just thought it was a nice way to add like a touch to this staff path, and you can see now where it comes out. We lit all of this area here, kept on going all the way up the stairs and out through this door here to where the exhibits and stuff are. I just thought that was a perfect way to go. The other thing I need to add is some of the barriers and stuff that I put in that I was talking about at the end of the last episode. They haven't really worked, but what I may be able to do is at least stop them clipping through walls by putting in some of the more refined staff areas. Then around here we just evened off this land, as you can see, put in some stonework there. There's a little bit of more stoneworking to do there just to finish that off, but that will be done in this episode as well. We're going to go back to our speed build now and continue building at night, because I've got some things to do to finish off this mulch area and put in a nice new framework. So we're putting some more mulch in here. We've got the beauty of that void at the back where there's actually nothing that's going to ever be seen, so we can use a few of the bigger pieces here, just showing you the void there. It's just a place where stuff can sink into without fear of it interfering with the rest of the build. Then we're bringing up our wood logs once again, because I'm going to create like a nice timber awning. We just need to keep ducking down and making sure that we're not making anything uneven. Like here we've got a nice horrible uneven piece that we need to even out. And we're going to do the same. We're just making 2-meter log posts going all the way up to create a kind of barrier. And I'm going to leave that stretch at the top completely open. So we're just kind of making a little awning and like a kind of a protective thing from the snow, so that guests can come and use this viewing area as they please without fear of getting soaked or drenched. There is a bin that's been flipped over there. I then continued the fences that I used for the actual reindeer habitat itself, but I sunk these further down so that we don't actually see the mesh portion, and just pop them in. So there's just that nice little timber frame as a little bit of a safety barrier for guests as they go up and down the stairs, and to line at the actual gardening bits that we're putting in here. I just thought it was a nice effective use of that piece, and it kept it integrated well with the rest of the theme that we've got going on here. And it looks pretty cool. Guests can still see over the top. We have actually put in our donation boxes as well, as you can see, something that I always forget to do. I build these nice big habitats and then forget to put any educational material in and any sort of boards and stuff. But we've sorted that. We're on top of it this time around. And then it was just a case of evening things out and getting everything put into place nice and tight and having it all uniform. Looking good. I do apologise if it is a little bit dark, but I felt like building at night was going to be the best option for me, so I can actually put in my lighting bits. I obviously didn't want to show all of the nighttime build because it starts out very dark, and until I get a decent bit of light in, it's very difficult to see what the hell's going on. But it's starting to really take shape now. I am going to sink down some of these wood logs, but they're not actually going to be used as a timber frame. I just wanted to get them placed in because they really finish off parts of it, and it looks really cool. And then we put this up a little bit more, and of course we then have to move our wood logs that are here. I just wanted to make sure that they didn't dip down into the void too much and come out the other side, because that would be an absolute nightmare. Coming around, we're going to use once again the brickwork frames here. We're not actually going to keep these in. I just thought this was the best way to use them to actually even off the top pieces here. They were a bit too thick to use for the majority of the build, so I wanted to get these put in place, then remove the guide that I've put in and use normal timber logs, the smaller and thinner ones that we've got running through various parts of the build itself, just to finish it off. This is where I started to get my first major clipping issues because of the way that I'd stacked these logs, but it was easily rectified by using some of the shorter pieces and deleting some of the stuff that we had in between, and it just came out really nice, and it didn't take too much moving around. And then here we are putting our logs back in place. Just put them in, delete the framework that we've got there, and then move further along, duplicating and putting everything into place, making it look really nice and finished off. So I decided not to have this actually covered, although I may come back and put some fabric going in between various bits just to see if we can make a nice little roof, or I may do like a glass piece all the way over the top of it just to give a little bit of shelter to this area, because I think it would be necessary, and it gives us a nice little area to finish off where guests can go and be protected from the snow and the cold and the rain. And we may even be able to put an animal talk in right there, looking out over onto the reindeer area. But I may also put one further down, actually right in front of the pen, and just extend the path a little bit, just to make sure that we've got a nice open space for guests to go and get like a nice animal talk. We could put some seating in, make it nice and covered. I was thinking of doing like a little stand type area and making it look a bit like an old timey, kind of like what you would get at a jousting tournament. Obviously it would have to fit in with the theme of the build itself, and we'd need to make sure that we don't go too like medieval English on it or whatever, but I think it would be quite a nice like finishing touch. So it was just a case of putting in some supporting beams so that it doesn't look like these wood beams are just floating freely, and looking at a way where we can actually put a kind of roof on this place, because I don't want to put too many supporting beams and stuff in place to get in the way of guests. But it's looking pretty good at the moment, and I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. Final bits of foliage here, we're just going to go all the way around and put in some nice greenery, some little bushes that are sticking out just to give a little bit of height variation on the plants that we've got down there. And then it's about putting in some pops of colour just to make sure that it looks really nice and finished off. Obviously, at the moment, it's snowing pretty heavy, and a lot of the plants and foliage that we're putting in are covered in snow, so we can't really see it. It'll be the same when we put anything that's got a nice pop of colour in. But I'm hoping once the snow clears and we get a little bit of a thaw, we can see everything for its true beauty. I then wanted to put a few trees in just on the outside, just to frame everything and give me a bit of a coverage on the actual outside parts of the build, so that it looks like we're encasing bits as we go, and then we can grow further out into another part of the zoo, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I hope I'm not just waffling, but I'm pretty happy. It's just about putting everything in place and then framing it as we go. Then we grow through the frame into the next part of the zoo, if that makes sense. I think it does. I think I'm kind of getting my point across, but yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm doing everything and finishing everything off, so that when I move on to the next part, I'm not having to think about going back and redoing bits, which is why I'm putting a lot more effort into getting this rock work done and making sure that all of our grasses and greenery and little bits of colour here and there are all done, so that we can truly say that we finished this part of the zoo before we move on to the next one, because I do have some big plans and I don't want to move on to another plan and realise, oh god, I forgot to do this 7 or 8 episodes ago, because I think that's been one of the main criticisms and failings with the first franchise mode zoo that we've got. And then we put in our nice Christmas trees, and they fit perfectly into this little area, and they offer a nice bit of like height variation and stuff, which I thought is really, really cool. I like the way that they stick out at the top as well, and that light continues on growing up. It's just a nice extra way to bring that little bit of light into the build itself. We then put some fallen trees down. It was hard to fit these in because they're so huge, but I think we managed it in the end. And obviously I put another one down in this big thing, which takes up a lot of space, and it's a nice centerpiece as well. It gives me a nice focal point for building up mosses and stuff and putting a lot of greenery in. And because there was no supporting pillar in this central piece, I wanted to do a little bit of moss growing up the back end of the wall there, but it was about first putting it in and finishing off this actual central planting. I didn't really have a big tree in mind, so we used some of those bushes that have more of a tree-like base to them. And then we put a few reeds and stuff in, just growing out, lady ferns and things like that, and then threw down a few more grasses and mosses. I thought about putting a big tree in, but some of them are so big, I just don't think there's much of a need to put them in. Instead of using some mosses, I did a nice little wall of rock just to break things up a little bit, because I thought after putting in that much greenery, it would be a better idea to have a little bit of a rock finish. And then we put down a nice trim, which I think looked really nice, and it just added that extra little bit of contrast that we need to finish that back part off. And then we put some of these lights in, making them look a little bit like, I don't know, mushroom spores that had kind of sprouted up on the log itself. Played around with some of the smaller ones. They do have a really nice glow, and it's soft enough that it doesn't interfere too much and cause too much of a impact on the actual beauty of the area. It's one of the things that I don't like about some of the lighting in here, is it's a little bit too harsh and a little bit too in your face, which is why I always tone things down just a touch. But I'm really happy with it. I was going to put some of those starlights in, but they didn't work too well, and it's just about thinking of different ways to use lights and make sure that we get all of this finished off. I then carried on the rock work at the back here, like I said I was going to do, just to really touch up the back end of the building itself, because it was having, it looked a little bit too much of a sheer drop off, I guess. And then it was just about making sure that these rocks don't interfere too much with the staff area, and they're not poking through the wall, because that would, again, break the immersion a little bit. But I think it looks really good. There's a little bit of a touching up I could do here, and I do finish that off at the end of the session. I just haven't shown it because I don't think it's necessary to show me playing around with rocks too much, because it does take up a lot of time and a lot of energy, which I don't have, and I'm certainly pretty sure that you guys don't have enough time and energy to watch this going on over and over again. But it was literally just about making sure that there's a smooth finish all the way around the build before we can move on. Again, we had to make sure that they didn't poke through into the exhibits, because we don't want that to happen either. There's just a lot to think about as you're building and going around and stuff, and it's very easy to miss little things. You might actually spend hours and hours doing this, and then just while you're doing a sweep through, or you're wanting to show something off to people, you stumble across a huge rock poking through an entirety of an exhibit and don't even realize that it's happened. But we did pretty well. I was pretty happy with it. Wanted to finish off because we put in a lot of new posts here for this staff area, so just wanted to give them a little bit of support and some struts. I am going to do something with this back area in future. I may run a path further up the mountain this way, and we also need to think about the case of maybe that the staff areas are a little bit too close to the guests and the guests may be put off by it, so we need to be prepared for the fact that we may need to move that entire staff building like 4 meters across. Anyway, it's time for a little showcase, so thank you for watching and I hope you enjoy it. So here we are, just doing a little bit of grazing down by the trees. Got a nice few rocks there, and they're pretty happy in here. There's a nice bit of space, there's plenty of enrichment and things, so it's really cool. Playing around with that snowman bopper, I guess. They just kind of walk into it. I have seen them bump heads with it a couple of times, but not too much. And then here's the overlook where the guests can look down on the whole habitat. You can see plenty here and it's really cool. They do seem to congregate over on that area though, so I'm hoping that they eventually get drawn back to the other part. And here's that waterfall with our keeper wandering into the back area, nice and out of sight of the guests. Over here, we've just got a little bit of a look into that area as guests come up to the info kiosk, and here we've still got some huge crowding problems that I'm going to need to solve, and we'll look into that. A lot of it is because there's not a lot of path there, and they kind of bump into each other quite a lot, which is where you're getting them walking on the spot. We've got some people coming in and some people leaving at the same time, and they kind of clash a little bit. They are starting to use this area a little bit more now, which is really nice to see. Coming around the front part of the habitat, looking at the reindeer before they actually go up to the info kiosk. You may have seen a little baby in the background there, and here it is. We've had a couple of births. They're already starting to expand, which is really nice because these guys aren't like top tier. They're a lovely waterfall, which I think looks amazing and actually doesn't seem to splash too much over onto the path, which is also good. I may put a little barrier in or something. Getting dark now, and looking really nice as the lights start to come on. And look at this lovely reflection as a reindeer swims coming out there. There's not a lot of swimming space, but they do kind of find it. It's like a plunge pool. And we've got one asleep in the barn, just proving that it works really. Nighttime, lovely well lit area. Those little spherical lights making a nice scene in that big planter there. Looking good. Our desert scorpion is our most popular animal, but I'm hoping the reindeer overtake that at some point. Generally, the animals are really happy and the welfare is pretty high. Guests are also happy. We've got a little bit of a marketing push, but we could do with a little bit more education and other things. Financially, we did take out a loan to facilitate their new build, and we have a few different things that we could work on. Obviously, expanding the zoo is the major one, and making sure that our food and drink vendors are covering a lot more than they currently are. Obviously, we've only got the vending machines in at the moment. We also have that info kiosk, which has got a lot of pressure on it. Average spend is pretty low, but I'm guessing that's just because we don't have a lot in the zoo at the moment, and the more we expand, the better this is going to get. But our guests are slowly starting to increase. I think year on year we're going to be improving as we go. We've got one vandalized bin, which I'm going to replace now. That's the one that featured quite heavily in the video while I was building. And looking at the charts, we've had like a couple of dips, but everything is starting to increase at the moment, which is also really good to see. It shows that we're moving in the right direction and we should expand. Because I was running the simulation to make money, it looks a bit more of a like flattened, like we're kind of just going in the same direction, but that's because as I was expanding and bringing the reindeers in, they've probably been here around 2 years. It's just taken me that long to build it. Financially though, we are overall making about £3 profit, just under 4. So looking pretty good, and I expect things to just improve as we go. Once we get that loan paid off as well, we'll probably have a little bit more money in the bank and you'll be able to see us grow a little bit more. We've got that £20 loan that we have pretty much just about paid off, which also shows you how long it's taken us to do this build. So here we are, very well lit, looking really nice and cozy at night time. I'd love to go here. And back to daytime. So I really hope you've enjoyed this build and are looking forward to the next one. I am kind of planning, I've got a few ideas that I want to explore. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all for the next one.